Ensign Liz Vantor had heard the old warning about humans her entire career, and she had always assumed it was the kind of story older officers told nervous cadets to keep them cautious, rather than something anyone actually needed to remember in the moment it mattered. She was finding out, with her hand on the firing control of a Vantha border cutter and a human convoy holding position 400 meters off her bow, that the moment it mattered had arrived faster than she expected. They have not lowered their shields. Her voice came out tighter than she wanted it to. 3 vessels, unidentified cargo, refusing standard inspection protocol. That is a hostile posture, Commander. Fleet Commander Doran Kesh stood at the secondary console behind her, close enough that she could feel the specific stillness of someone who was watching the situation with far less alarm than she was. "It is a cautious posture," Doran said. "Those are not the same thing. They are refusing inspection. They are requesting clarification of jurisdiction before complying with inspection. That is also in their transmission log, if you read past the first line." Doran did not move from where he stood. "Lower your hand from the firing control, Ensign." Liz did not lower it. Her readout showed the human convoy holding steady, weapons cold, shields up but not cycling for combat configuration, the specific posture of vessels that were nervous rather than aggressive. She knew the difference. She had trained on the difference for 3 years. She also had a directive from Sector Command that treated any unidentified convoy refusing inspection as a border violation requiring immediate resolution. And resolution, in border cutter doctrine, generally meant a warning shot across the bow followed by boarding if the warning was ignored. "Commander, my orders are clear on unidentified convoys refusing inspection." "Your orders are clear on unidentified convoys." Doran's tone had not changed. "These are not unidentified. Pull the registry flag on the lead vessel." Liz pulled it. The lead vessel's transponder resolved a registration code she recognized immediately, because every cadet in the Vantha Fleet Academy learned to recognize it in their first cycle of training, the same way they learned to recognize a distress beacon or a quarantine flag. "Human registry." "They're human," she said. "That doesn't change the jurisdiction question." "No," Doran said. "It changes everything else." He crossed to her station and put 2 fingers against the back of her hand, not forcing it away from the firing control, simply resting there, the specific weight of someone making a point without making a demand. "Order 11, Vantha Fleet Doctrine," he said. "Recite it for me." She knew it. Every officer knew it, the same way every officer knew the basic rules of engagement, except Order 11 had always felt to her like the kind of regulation that existed for completeness rather than necessity, a rule written for a danger nobody alive had ever actually encountered. "No Vantha vessel will initiate hostile action against a human-flagged vessel without confirmed and documented provocation," she said. "Regardless of jurisdictional dispute, regardless of command pressure, regardless of perceived tactical advantage." And the penalty clause, for the officer who initiates anyway. She had skipped that part in her memorization, because it had never once seemed relevant. "I don't recall the exact wording." "Then let me recall it for you," Doran said. "Because in 30 years of service I have recited it exactly once before today, and I would like this to be the second and last time." His fingers stayed against her hand. "Any officer who initiates unprovoked hostile action against a human vessel, regardless of outcome, will be held personally responsible under Vantha military law for triggering Registry Amendment 14 Sol against the Vantha homeworld. There is no rank, no command override, and no diplomatic appeal that reverses that amendment once it is filed." Liz looked at her readout. The human convoy, still holding, still patient, still refusing to escalate even though by every measure of border cutter doctrine they should have been treated as a threat 10 minutes ago. "What is Registry Amendment 14 Sol?" she said. Doran was quiet for a moment. "It is the reason," he said. "You have never once heard of a species testing that warning twice." The Korsa Imperium had been, 141 years earlier, a fleet power with 11 systems under direct control, and a long, well-documented record of treating newly contacted species, exactly the way Marshal Vren Thalos intended to treat the human survey vessel his border patrol had just detected drifting through Korsa-claimed space. "Single vessel," his sensor officer reported. "Survey configuration, civilian registry, no weapon signature beyond standard point defense. Species designation human, recent. Lie cataloged by the Conquered, no military reputation on file." Vren Thalos had heard of humans the way every fleet commander in that sector had heard of them in those years, which was barely at all. A new entry in the Conquered species registry. Recently contacted, recently integrated, no demonstrated military capacity, no established alliances of consequence. The kind of species that border patrols occasionally found drifting through claimed territory and dealt with according to whatever local doctrine seemed convenient, because the Conquered's enforcement mechanisms were slow and distant, and the Korsa Imperium had never found much reason to wait for them. "Disable it," Vren said. "Board it. Whatever cargo or technology it is carrying belongs to the Imperium now. It strayed into our space." Marshal, his tactical officer, a younger man named Sail Dren, hesitated before continuing. "The vessel has not engaged in any hostile action. It is a survey craft. Disabling it without provocation could be classified as an unprovoked attack under Conquered registry law." Conquered registry law is a suggestion enforced by entities too slow to enforce it. Disable the vessel, Sail. Sail disabled the vessel. The human survey ship's drive systems went dark within 90 seconds, the crew compartment intact, the boarding party finding 11 human crew members and a cargo hold full of geological survey equipment that the Korsa Imperium had no particular use for but claimed anyway, on principle, because claiming things that strayed into Korsa space was simply what the Korsa Imperium did. The survey ship's captain, a woman named Wenadami, did not resist the boarding. She did not argue with Marshal Thalos when he addressed her crew over the open channel to confirm the terms of their detention. She listened, with the specific attentiveness of someone gathering information rather than someone accepting a fate, and when Thalos finished speaking, she asked a single question. "Are you aware," she said, "that Earth filed a standing notice with the Conquered Registry 8 years ago regarding unprovoked attacks on human vessels?" "I am not aware of every minor filing your species has made with a bureaucracy that has no enforcement teeth," Thalos said, "nor do I care to be." "You should have asked," Wen said. "It would have taken less time than this conversation." Thalos released the crew and the vessel 4 days later, once the equipment had been stripped and cataloged, the standard practice for a Korsa border seizure that did not warrant ongoing detention. He gave the matter no further thought, the way he had given no further thought to the dozen similar seizures his patrols had conducted that year. He gave it considerably more thought 11 weeks later, when the Korsa Imperium's primary trade corridor through Conquered-controlled space returned a navigation error for the first time in the Imperium's recorded history. The Conquered Registry Office that processed Earth's filing did so with the specific procedural calm of an administrative body handling a request that was, on its face, entirely unremarkable. Registrar Vas Kale had been processing registry amendments for the Outer Tessavar district for 16 years, and Earth's submission, when it arrived, did not initially strike him as anything other than a routine documentation request. A formal incident report, a request for registry annotation regarding an unprovoked attack on a registered civilian vessel. He had processed dozens of similar requests, most resulting in a formal note of censure against the offending party, occasionally a fine, rarely anything with teeth, because the Concord's registry annotations existed primarily to create a record rather than to compel a consequence. He read the specific language of Earth's requested amendment more carefully on his second pass through the document. Because the language was unusually precise for a species, this new to the Concord's administrative framework. The request did not ask for a fine. It did not ask for a formal censure. It asked the registry to adopt, as a standing rule applicable to all current and future incidents matching the documented pattern, a single automatic consequence. Any species whose vessel initiated unprovoked hostile action against a human-flagged vessel would have their homeworld's registry entry permanently flagged non-compliant, severing all navigational corridor access, trade clearance, and diplomatic standing within Concord-administered space, with no appeal process and no expiration date. Voss read it a third time. He brought it to his supervisor, a senior administrator named Director Marin Saul, because a request of this scope exceeded his authority to process independently. "This is not a punishment for one incident," Voss said. "This is a standing law. It would apply automatically forever to anyone who matches the pattern, including species that have not been discovered yet." Director Saul read the filing with the same careful attention Voss had given it. "Do they have legal standing to request a permanent registry rule?" she asked, "rather than a case-specific remedy?" "Any Concord member can petition for a standing rule. Most don't, because standing rules require unanimous non-objection from the full member council within the filing window, and most petitions of this scope generate enough objection to fail." Voss paused. "This one didn't." "Why not?" "Because nobody objected within the window. I checked the record 3 times before bringing it to you. 11 Concord members reviewed the petition during the comment period. None of them filed an objection." He set the document down. "I believe most of them assumed a species this new would not actually have any incidents to enforce it against." It read, to most of the council, like a hypothetical. Director Saul was quiet for a long moment. "And the Korsa Imperium incident," she said. "Filed for review 4 days after the petition window closed. The amendment was already active." Voss looked at the documentation again. "It was not retroactive by design. It became active 11 weeks before the Korsa incident even occurred. Earth filed the standing rule, waited, and did not need to ask for anything further when the first incident matching the pattern arrived. The rule simply applied itself." "That is either remarkably good timing," Director Saul said, "or it was never about timing at all." Voss did not have an answer for that, and the registry processed the Korsa Imperium's delisting the following morning, exactly as the standing rule required, without further deliberation, without further appeal, and without a single Concord representative raising an objection at any point in the process. The Korsa Imperium discovered what delisting actually meant in the specific, accumulating way that consequences arrive when nobody announces them directly. The trade corridor returning a navigation error was the first sign. Marshal Thallows's own border patrol, returning from a routine patrol along the Imperium's primary commerce route, found their standard transit authorization rejected at the corridor checkpoint, the automated system returning a flag that no officer present had ever seen generate before. Registry status: non-compliant. Access denied. No appeal process available at this checkpoint. The patrol diverted to a secondary route. The secondary route returned the same flag. Within a month, every Concord-administered corridor the Korsa Imperium had relied on for trade, diplomatic travel, and resupply returned the same denial. Imperium vessels attempting to dock at any Concord-affiliated station found their registry credentials refused at the gate. Trade partners who had maintained agreements with the Imperium for decades found their own ships unable to complete the journey to Korsa space, because the corridors that connected to it had been administratively severed, not by force, not by blockade, simply by the Concord's navigation network ceasing to recognize the Imperium's homeworld as a valid destination. Marshal Thallos petitioned the conquered directly, 3 separate times, requesting review of the delisting. The response, identical each time, came from Registrar Vasquez's office. The registry amendment under which your homeworld was delisted contains no appeal mechanism. This was a condition of the amendment's adoption and cannot be revised without a new standing petition achieving full council non-objection, which your government remains free to file. We note for the record that the Imperium has not, in any of its 3 petitions, disputed that the underlying incident occurred. It had not because it could not. Marshal Thallos had ordered the disabling of an unprovoked civilian vessel. The boarding had been logged by his own crew's standard recording protocols, and when Adami's formal incident report to the conquered had included the recording in full. The Korsa Imperium's economy, built across 11 systems on trade routes that ran almost entirely through conquered-administered corridors, did not collapse immediately. It contracted, slowly and then more quickly, over the following decade, as every external relationship the Imperium depended on found itself unable to reach Korsa space at all. Within 15 years, 4 of the Imperium's 11 systems had effectively seceded, citing the homeworld's inability to maintain trade or defense commitments. Within 30 years, the Korsa Imperium that Marshal Thallos had once commanded a fleet for existed, in any meaningful interstellar sense, as a single isolated system, cut off from the wider galaxy by an administrative flag that no fleet, no diplomat, and no petition had ever managed to remove. Marshal Thallos lived the remainder of his life within that single system, never again permitted to cross a conquered corridor checkpoint, and the story of what one unprovoked seizure of a human survey vessel had sent the Imperium spread, in the careful, exaggerated, and eventually entirely accurate way, that consequential stories spread among species who had every reason to want to know exactly how far the warning extended. Liz Vantor stood at her console with Doran Kesh's fingers still resting against the back of her hand, and understood, finally, why the old story had never needed updating in 141 years. "That's still active," she said, "the delisting after all this time. It has never been removed. It will never be removed. That was the entire design." Doran straightened and the pressure against her hand lifted, though she had already, somewhere in the last several minutes, taken it off the firing control herself. "The Korsa system is still there, Ensign, still inhabited. You can look up its registry status right now if you would like to see it for yourself." She pulled it up. The flag was exactly as old as the story claimed, time-stamped 141 years in the past, unaltered, unappealed, permanent. "Why hasn't anyone tested it again?" she said. "In 141 years. Surely someone somewhere decided the odds were worth the risk." A few did in the early years. Smaller incidents, smaller species, less documented. Each one ended the same way. Eventually it stopped being a story about humans at all. Doran looked at the human convoy still holding steady on her display, patient, undefended, entirely unaware of how close the last 10 minutes had come to becoming the second chapter of a story they had not even known was being tested against them. It became a story about the Conquered's registry, and what happens to anyone foolish enough to give it a reason to act. "They didn't fight back," Liz said. "The humans, not with a fleet, not with retaliation. No. They just made it so nobody would ever want to." Doran was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone deciding how to put something simply that did not have a simple shape. "Most species learn a lesson by being shown what happens if they break a rule," he said. "Humans built a rule that taught the lesson without ever needing to show anyone anything twice. The Korsa Imperium is the only species that ever needed the demonstration." He nodded at her readout, at the human convoy still patiently waiting for an inspection that had, in the last several minutes, very nearly never happened at all. "Open the channel, Ensign. Apologize for the delay." Then clear them through inspection the way procedure actually requires, not the way your nerves were about to require it. Liz opened the channel. The human captain on the other end, a woman whose voice carried the particular evenness of someone who had been monitoring a tense standoff for the better part of 15 minutes without once raising her own weapons in response, answered on the first signal. Vantha Border Cutter, this is Captain Mara Okonkwo, convoy lead. We're ready to proceed with inspection whenever you are. Apologies for the delay, Captain, Liz said. We needed to confirm jurisdiction protocol before proceeding. Understood, take whatever time you need. A brief pause. For what it's worth, we weren't going to escalate this regardless of how long it took. Figured you'd work it out. Liz looked at Doran, who said nothing, his expression carrying the specific patience of someone who already knew exactly how that sentence had been true the entire time. You sound very confident of that, Captain, Liz said. We've had 141 years of evidence that border standoffs with us tend to resolve themselves, Mara Okonkwo said. We're not in a hurry. We've never needed to be. The inspection cleared 11 minutes later without further incident. Liz filed her own report that evening, the way every officer was required to file a report following any standoff that escalated past standard parameters, and in the field reserved for additional remarks, she wrote something that was not, strictly speaking, required. She wrote, I came within reach of testing Registry Amendment 14 Sol today, not through malice, but through procedure I had never questioned closely enough. Commander Kesh stopped me before I understood why stopping mattered. I am recommending that Order 11 be taught with the full Korsa Imperium case file attached, rather than summarized in a single paragraph, because I believe the reason the warning still works after 141 years is that most species who hear the full story only need to hear it once. If this one reached somewhere the others did not, it's in the part nobody had to write twice. One incident, one filing, no fleet sent in retaliation, no warning shot fired in anger, just a single, precisely worded amendment to a registry most species assumed was too slow and too distant to ever actually enforce anything. The Korsa Imperium tested that assumption once, 141 years ago, and Lowe's access to the entire galaxy for it permanently, without a single human ship ever needing to fire a weapon. Every species since has had the same choice the Korsa Imperium had. Almost none of them have needed to think about it twice. That's the whole lesson, and it's why this is the last one in the bank worth telling first. Humanity didn't have to be feared to be left alone. They just had to be precise exactly once, and let the rest of the galaxy do the remembering for them. Stay human.